Hello and welcome to Corporate Culture, your podcast about cooperation, conflict, and culture at work. My name is Paul Emzev, and in this episode, I spoke with Ida Manton about diplomacy at work. For more than 20 years, Ida worked for international organizations both as local and as international staff. She studied international relations and diplomacy in the Netherlands and then specialized in training various audiences in negotiation and diplomacy. Ida works with diplomatic academies, universities, think tanks, international organizations, as well as youth groups and business education centers. In addition to that, Ida is also a visiting professor at the University of Economics in Prague and regularly publishes her research on international negotiations and diplomacy. In this episode, we spoke about what diplomacy really is, how we can develop diplomatic skills for our professional life, and how diplomacy can help us improve cooperation and conflict at work. I hope you enjoy our conversation with Ida Manton. Ida, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Today, we want to talk a bit about diplomacy and specifically diplomacy at work. And maybe a good question to start would be, what do we mean by diplomacy? How would you explain to people what diplomacy is about?
Yeah, it's a very interesting field because everybody has a feeling, oh, we know what diplomacy is. Everybody has a feeling that they know what a diplomat is. But even if you ask people like me who are researching diplomacy and the role of a diplomat and the skill set that a diplomat has or should have, it's not a very clear-cut answer, and it has never been actually. So very often the definitions about diplomacy circle around a few words, that it is a complex and evolving practice, that it's not something that is new, but it has always been around for thousands of years. And one more thing that I would add is that its fundamental aspect is that it regulates the international relations. So it is a complex social process that involves the, let's say, peaceful conduct of relations among states. And that's primarily done through negotiation and dialogue. So that is, what for me is very interesting and important because, this is why I have been studying negotiations, because it is part of what diplomacy means. And then we, in our research field, we assume that all the diplomats know how to negotiate, and that is one of the myths about diplomacy and diplomats, because I have come across many diplomats who actually have not had enough training, have not been prepared for the job, and were given very, very serious tasks without even understanding the complexity, and as Socrates would say, how much they don't know about the field,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So of course, nobody will ever know everything, and nobody will ever be in the ideal situation where they can give their best. But I have discovered over time that many of the people that I have interviewed about certain processes that happened in the past, that they were left with improvisation because they had nothing else. A, they didn't have the needed knowledge. B, they didn't have the team around that would have all the skills that were necessary, because of course you cannot assume that everybody has all the skills. You cannot be the best lawyer, you cannot be the best constitutional lawyer, you cannot be the best business brain that the country or your organization has. So that's why we have teams. But rarely diplomacy is that well thought of or prepared to actually send the best people at a particular negotiation table for doing the job. So, uh, you know, nations usually are seen as the agents of international relations, but I think that line has been blurred as well, because nowadays we have more and more government officials negotiating with business community or huge corporations that have a very important say in certain fields, you know? So it's not just governments talking to governments. It's not like it used to be the sovereign, the prince or the king talking to another sovereign, another king. All of that has been blurred and changed. And I think the field of diplomacy has been democratized and has become even more complex than it was previously when we started studying negotiations and diplomacy as a specific academic field.
Mm, mhm, mhm. You know, when I talk to people about diplomacy and also diplomacy as a skill, I think that many people have this image, maybe from movies, that it's mainly about manners. You know how to sit at a table and how to eat oysters and when to greet which person and so on. And listening to you, I feel that it's more than manners, right? So it's a whole skill set of things. Do you have some examples of what is a diplomatic skill?
Absolutely. So, you know, when I started, you reminded me of the beginnings when I started my first professional jobs. I started working for Peace Corps and I was teaching language and culture to Peace Corps volunteers, still one of my most favorite jobs that I've had. And after that, I thought, you know, I want to do something with high level visits, because we would have in Peace Corps the head of Peace Corps or the ambassador coming and talking to municipal leaders, mayors, and so on. And I was like, wow, this must be really interesting to be among those people who are organizing these events, who have to make sure that they know who's standing where, who is talking, and who's saying what. And so I applied for a job with the American Embassy at that time, you know, in the country where I was born and grew up, which changed its name 4 times. So now people know, only in my lifetime. In my grandmother's time, it changed its name, I think, 6 times.
Oh.
So now it's known as North Macedonia, but at that time it was Republic of Macedonia. But nonetheless, I applied the embassy, and I think that I want to learn protocol, because I as well thought that most of diplomacy is about protocol. And then I started reading books about it, and I was like, you cannot learn this at any university. There's nobody who will teach you how to write invitations and what is protocol and what is actual act of diplomacy. When does the work of the technical staff end? Does it, you know, is it just the plates and where the forks are and napkins and who sits where? Or do they also get a say in, you know, the substantial conversation? And I thought that I'd rather be among those people who are part of the conversation, so that I would prepare the people, make sure that they take into consideration most of the things that are necessary for, you know, resolving a problem or discussing something. When do you say things? Who says what? And so many questions. And then I got a job with the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, because I studied literature, and I was lucky to work with the spokesperson, and we were focusing on the words. How do we express things so that they're not misunderstood? But also, you know, how to sell our story, right? Because nobody is objective, or to an extent that they don't have their meaning to the words that are being shared. So very early in my career, I learned that, you know, the words are the foundation of diplomacy, but they have to happen in certain setting where you need to have the staff who will think about where will the negotiation process happen, who will be sitting at the table, is the level right, who is being represented by others, and how, and so on and so on. So I was very lucky, basically, that very early on in my life, I started working for international organizations in conflict areas. So that is how I specialized, in a way, to work and to learn more about you know, conflict resolution, conflict management. And I realized that much more of the work that I previously assumed is protocol was about the content, the substance, about knowledge you needed to learn. And I went back to do my master at Leiden University in Klingendal. You needed to learn about law, about conflict resolution, identities, stereotypes, you know, international courts, international law, humanitarian law. And when you start this path, you're like, oh my God, there's so much more that one needs to know to be involved in the field of international relations, diplomacy, and negotiation. So I think that, all of us, I guess you included, we can just understand or attempt to grasp just part of what diplomacy, what negotiation, or what international relations are. But I really envy people who don't even have that parcel of knowledge, and they, arrogantly believe that they should be the next Minister of Foreign Affairs, or they should be the next president, or just because they're a good business person, therefore they know how to negotiate peace conflicts and so on. I think there's certain qualities, certain skills are transferable, but I think we need a lot of modesty to recognize that there's so much that we don't know, and therefore we can consider a real value, real treasure when we can work in a team so that we can fill in those gaps that we all have. We all have them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I work mainly in workplace conflicts, and there often I also hear this goal of be diplomatic. Let's try to be diplomatic here. These kind of things. So not only in international relations, but also in very normal workplace contexts. And I would be curious what you think. Why do we need diplomacy? What is diplomatic behavior good for?
Yeah, I teach negotiation courses at different international relations and diplomacy kind of departments at either universities or diplomatic academies, international organizations. We prepared, for instance, 3 of the presidencies of the EU, Romania, Malta, Croatia. And it's really fascinating to work and model and help these people who will be doing this kind of job. And I really love that training part of my portfolio and teaching that I have. And very often I hear things like, you have to be diplomatic. And then when you ask them, but what does that mean? Does that mean that you should have, the nice silk gloves and you say things that just sound polite? Is it rude to call the things by their name? Is it rude to be blunt, which is a very cultural variable, right? How direct, how blunt, how strict with their words people are. For some cultures, it's not even acceptable to discuss openly some contested issues. You need to figure out a way how to circle around the bush. For other cultures, it's a waste of time. Why are we talking for such a long time about something that is so obvious? Is it obvious? What's the elephant in the room? And so on. So, in academia, there's a lot of different names for all of these things. What is diplomatic? What is not diplomatic? And, I come from a background or breed of people, if you want, who are, there was a term that a few years ago, I came across, academics, I think. So practitioners and academics. And that is a very, very nuanced thing, because there are diplomats who come directly from university. They go diplomatic academy, they join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, State Department, take exams, and voila, you're modeled, you're done, you're a diplomat, and that is what your profession is. And for those people, life is very easy in a way, because they know what they are. They work for the ministry, but then there are a lot of complications afterwards, because you can work in China and then you go as a bilateral ambassador to Argentina, but then you're sent to international organization, and it's a completely different diplomacy and multilateralism that they don't understand, so they have to learn and so on. Whereas there are other people who come in this field from a business setting, and they, for instance, work in the Ministry of Economy, and they're being sent to Brussels to work at EU level. So they also have to perform diplomatic duties, but they don't necessarily have the diplomatic training. Now, the question of how diplomatic is a certain behavior, I think is I realize in the simulations that we have with my students that many of them mistake diplomatic for honest,
Mm.
right? It doesn't mean that just because you're polite, you're well-intended, or, you know, I
Mhm.
think it is very important to clarify what is it that we want from a particular process and how do we achieve that, rather than call it diplomatic or undiplomatic.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a very good point. Again, thinking about old movies, for example, because you were just saying people behave very politely, but then maybe the intentions are different. Uh, in these old movies, you also often see people sitting on a table very politely, with great manners, speaking to each other, but with horrible intentions and really hating each other actually. So I really like that point that you mentioned, that it's not only about manners or about protocol, but also, I say, about the mindset probably behind it.
Exactly. But you know what I see very often with my students who are simulating some scenario that either I lived through or I wrote for them, so I researched a lot. You know, some of them are young and enthusiastic and they just want to say things the way they are, but they're not thinking, how would, let's say, the Soviet Union in 75 react to that,
Mhm.
right? Because they feel that with their uh, you know uh, let's say inexperience, that they can say things and sort them out. Diplomacy requires that constructive ambiguity. It's like a dance. You have to see the other party, how they behave. You have to understand their motivation. How fast are they willing to go with the process? How fast will they open up to you? Will you develop that kind of open relationship that will be based on trust? Or you're still adversaries who are using words instead of weapons?
Mm.
Because I don't know if you've read, but Odin has one beautiful poem the diplomats very often quote. It's called Embassy, and he talks about the difference between what happens at the negotiation table, where diplomats are fighting over words and commas and the structure of the text, and how many young lives will be lost at the battlefield if these people fail at the table.
Mm.
Right? So it is, I think it requires a lot of experience, not just reading, but you need to be in these negotiation rooms and also learn at the same time. What is the person across from me thinking? Who is this person? What is the mandate that they have? Can they make decision? Am I talking to the right person? Is
Mm.
this the decision maker, or this needs to go higher up? Is their structure the same as our structure? And in order to get there, it requires, a long time. It's like on the dance floor at the beginning of the evening when everybody's uncertain about their dancing styles and moves, but at the end of the night, everybody's there and the party is just, blossoming. And but to get there, we require a lot of experience, a lot of trust, and a lot of talking.
Mm.
And many people are not very good at fine tuning when to talk. Some people are uncomfortable with long silences, right? And the other party can use that. Oh, go ahead, tell me more. Um, so this is what I see very often with my participants, and very often they're not students, they're experienced diplomats. And the more opportunities we have to be in controlled setting where we can challenge ourselves, learn about ourselves, and see how others react in same scenarios, I think it's really wonderful to learn more about us and others, and action, reaction, building trust, and have somebody experienced to discuss all of this with. This is what I try to do in my trainings.
Yeah, and I really like your metaphor of the dance, and it makes me also think about this balance of leading and being led, or leading or pacing. These because I mean, in a dance as well, right? Somebody has to lead, and I was curious if for you, for example, being diplomatic means that you always give away the lead, or if there are moments where it's also necessary or beneficiary to actually take the lead. What do you think about that?
I think, it really depends on many factors. First of all, what kind of mandate do you have? Second of all, what you want to achieve. There's a gender element to this. Women are told that they're the ones who are scared to ask for more, which I disagree with. But there's a lot of social contextual things around gender that needs to be considered as well. There's a lot of cultural things. Is it rude maybe to take a lead if somebody is higher level or different level in their ministry or age or gender, whatever? But there might be different reasons for why people stay uninvolved or why people take the lead. And you need to be able to tell that in order to debunk certain stereotypes that might turn into very, very problematic dynamic later on. If somebody's too assertive, they might be doing that from the goodness of their heart. But eventually, people around the table will not be very happy because they will seem like, taking over responsibility that I'm sent here to have that responsibility, and my boss needs to see that I did my job as well.
Yeah.
So, that dynamic of personal personality style, am I too assertive as a person and I can be the Indonesian ambassador, whereas you might be an introvert and be American? It will not correspond to the power of the country or the necessity of achievement that you have through the mandate. But that is why it is very important to be able to assess how much of what I'm seeing is the personality, how much of what I'm seeing is the power that comes from your position, country, veto power that you might have, and so on. And how do we figure out ways to have good, effective communication that will help both of us end up in a better place? Because that's what negotiation is. You enter the negotiation process in order to improve the situation, to be better off than you are now. And often that is being understood as, something that I need to do to progress my position. Whereas, many leaders and many negotiators understand that in order for me to progress, we as a team need to progress together.
Mm. And you mentioned already several downsides of being undiplomatic. Are there any reasons, as we see now many people do it, behave very undiplomatic? Are there any advantages of being undiplomatic sometimes?
For them, yes, but it's devastating for their country. It's devastating for the system that was being built. And you need to ask yourself, why are they doing what they're doing, right? So very often, you have leaders who are unhappy about the position their country, their municipality, their city is in, and they want to reshuffle things, and they want things to change, but they don't have the capacity or even standard operating procedures or process for that to happen.
When we think about diplomacy, as you mentioned, we usually associate that with international relations, with world politics, as you just described very well. If we would try to transfer this into, let's say, normal workplaces, places where all of us in office jobs, for example, work, would you say that you can transfer these diplomatic skills also into these kind of contexts, or is it very different?
It's interesting that you're asking this question, because now with social media and, developing different networks, I get more and more invited to do work with, business to business negotiations, doing training for, people that traditionally are not from my very narrow path. And I ask them, why do you want me to work with you? And they say, because naturally we think that we should translate the diplomatic skills to the workplace, because business people need to learn diplomatic skills as well. because they have international negotiations. They need to learn not just the etiquette, but they need to learn also the substance. They need to learn how to communicate. They need to understand the psychology of the person on the other side, right? It's no longer enough to just know your numbers, your Excel sheets, send your best and brightest economists, and the job will be done. Now we need to have teams of people. Send the economists, yes, absolutely. But with him, maybe send a mentor and a coach who will help them, advise them how to send their message across, how to make sure that they build a relationship and that they build trust, rather than go there, take the bull by the horn, win this one, and go back home and say, I'm done. Yeah, but what does that mean for our long-term relationship with this company, with this society, right? So we need to learn from each other. Also, diplomats, they need to learn from economists, from business people. They're moving and shaking the world we live in, right? One will not be able to exist without the other.
Yeah, so still a lot of work to do. Thank you so much for sharing all those insights, those very interesting observations that you have on negotiations, on diplomatic behavior and on diplomacy, both on the world level but also on the workplace. And I wish you all the best for all your future projects.
Thank you very much. And also thank you for inviting me to have this very inspiring conversation. I think, it is very important to keep talking, and maybe, just the two of us have this conversation will inspire some people to do something about this, to acquire some new skill, to reach out and figure out how they can become better. I ask that from my students, from my participants in the courses that I have, not just because they will become better professionals, but because I think we're all becoming better people if we learn how to listen to the other side, if we try to put ourselves in their shoes, if they try to have dialogue as opposed to, always assuming that we're right and we're the best. And I think these are skills that we need to practice. And it is very good if those skills are practiced with mentors, with people who can coach you and tell you, what did you do in this particular instance and how you can do that better. So thank you for inviting me. I hope that we have sparked some people to think about this further, and that they will pick up some book on negotiation or, history of diplomacy even, and learn something about themselves and how to be better at what they're doing.
Thank you very much, Ida. It's been my pleasure.
All the best. Thank you again.